Doolin's bunch. The Katy Flyer was running 20 minutes late when it rounded the bend near Cimarron Station, black smoke trailing behind it like a funeral shroud against the Oklahoma sky. Bill Doolin watched from his position on the rocky outcrop above the tracks, a thin smile creasing his weathered face as he checked his pocket watch. 20 minutes late meant 20 minutes more for the express car guards to get comfortable, maybe take a swig from the bottle he knew they kept hidden behind the mail sacks. "She's coming," he called down to the men positioned along the railroad cut. His voice carried the easy authority of a man who'd been giving orders to dangerous men for the better part of 5 years. Below him, Bitter Creek Newcomb shifted his position behind a fallen cottonwood, the Winchester in his hands catching the afternoon sun. George Newcomb was built like a scarecrow, all sharp angles and nervous energy, but he could put 6 shots into a playing card at 100 yards. More importantly, he had the kind of cold-blooded patience that made him perfect for this kind of work. "About damn time," muttered Tulsa Jack Blake from his spot behind a cluster of red rocks. Jack was the opposite of Newcomb, thick-set and powerful, with hands like ham hocks and a disposition to match. Where Newcomb was precise, Jack was brutal. Where Newcomb might wound, Jack killed. It made them a good team, like a rifle and a shotgun. Dynamite Dick Clifton was already moving toward the tracks, his saddlebags heavy with the tools of his particular trade. Dick got his nickname honestly. There wasn't a safe made that he couldn't crack, no railroad car he couldn't open like a tin of peaches. He was a small man, slight as a jockey, but his fingers were more valuable than a dozen gun hands when it came to separating express companies from their money. The fifth man, Arkansas Tom Jones, remained mounted on his horse behind the rocks, holding the reins of the other animals. Tom was the youngest of the bunch at 24, but he'd already killed 3 men in fair fights and twice that many in unfair ones. He had the pale, hollow-cheeked look of consumption, but his eyes were steady as stones and twice as hard. Doolin himself was the glue that held this collection of killers and thieves together. At 35, he was old enough to command respect, but young enough to take risks that more cautious men wouldn't consider. He'd learned his trade riding with the Dalton gang, before those boys got themselves shot to pieces in Coffeyville. The lesson he'd taken from that disaster was simple: planning and patience beat blind courage every time. The train whistle echoed across the prairie as the Katy Flyer began its approach to the water stop at Cimarron Station. Doolin could see the engineer leaning out of his cab, probably wondering why there were so many trees and rocks that hadn't been there on his northbound run that morning. "Remember," Doolin called down, "we want the express car, not the passengers. This is business, not butchery." But even as he said it, he knew that distinction might not hold once the shooting started. Bitter Creek had a nervous trigger finger, and Tulsa Jack seemed to enjoy killing almost as much as he enjoyed drinking. As for Arkansas Tom, the boy had a reputation for being unpredictable when things went sideways. The locomotive's brakes began to squeal as the engineer spotted Dynamite Dick's handiwork, a pile of railroad ties stacked across the tracks about 50 yards from the water tower. Steam hissed from the cylinder as the big engine ground to a halt, its bell clanging in distress. "Now," Doolin shouted. The 5 outlaws moved with the practiced coordination of men who'd done this dance before. Bitter Creek and Tulsa Jack took positions on either side of the express car, their rifles trained on the reinforced door. Arkansas Tom rode forward to cover the passenger cars, his horse dancing sideways as nervous travelers pressed their faces to the windows. Dynamite Dick approached the express car like a craftsman going to work, his saddlebags already open and his tools in hand. The express messenger inside, a man named Coleman, whom Doolin recognized from previous encounters, was shouting something about company regulations and federal crimes. "Open up, Coleman," Doolin called out, dismounting and walking toward the car with his hands visible but close to his guns. "You know how this works. Nobody has to get hurt if everybody stays smart." "Go to hell, Doolin," came the reply from inside. This car stays locked. Doolin sighed. Coleman was new to the job, still full of company loyalty and foolish notions about heroism. The older express messengers had learned that express company gold wasn't worth dying for, but the young ones sometimes needed convincing. "Dick," he said quietly. Dynamite Dick nodded and went to work. Within 5 minutes, he had a small charge of black powder positioned against the car's lock mechanism. The explosion, when it came, was surprisingly modest, just enough to blow the door open without damaging the contents or killing anyone inside. Coleman stumbled out of the smoke-filled car, his hands raised and his face pale with shock. He was maybe 25, with the soft look of a man who'd never been in a real fight. "Smart boy," Doolin said approvingly. "Now step aside and let my associate conduct his business." Dynamite Dick disappeared into the express car like a ferret going down a rabbit hole. Within minutes, canvas sacks began flying out of the doorway, mail sacks that clinked with the distinctive sound of gold coins, and a leather satchel that probably contained paper money and bank drafts. That's when the shooting started. The first shot came from the locomotive, where the fireman had apparently decided to play hero with a pistol he probably didn't know how to use properly. The bullet went wide, striking sparks off the railroad tracks, but it was enough to set everyone's nerves on edge. Bitter Creek's Winchester cracked in response, and the fireman tumbled from the engine cab with a scream that cut through the prairie air like a knife. The man hit the ground hard and didn't move. "God damn it, George," Doolin snapped. "I said no killing." But it was too late for regrets. A passenger car window shattered as someone inside took a shot at Arkansas Tom, who responded by putting 3 rounds through the wooden side of the car. Women screamed. Men cursed. And the careful choreography of a simple train robbery dissolved into chaos. Tulsa Jack seemed to take the eruption of violence as a personal invitation. He began stalking along the passenger cars, his rifle ready, looking for targets. When a traveling salesman poked his head out of a window, Jack shot him in the face without hesitation. "Jack!" Doolin shouted. "Stand down." But Jack Blake was in his element now, the killing fever on him like whiskey on a drunk. He kicked in the door of the first passenger car and disappeared inside. The screaming got louder. Arkansas Tom was having his own problems. A group of men had gathered at the far end of the train, cowboys by their look, probably heading north to Kansas with a trail herd's pay in their pockets. They were armed and seemed inclined to fight rather than submit to robbery. Tom's horse shied as bullets began snapping around him, but the young outlaw held his seat with the skill of a man born in the saddle. His return fire was methodical, precise, dropping one cowboy and sending the others scrambling for cover behind the train's wheels. Dynamite Dick emerged from the express car with his arms full of loot, but his usually pale face was flushed with excitement and something else, fear maybe or disgust at the carnage erupting around him. "Bill," he called out, "we got what we came for. Time to go." Doolin knew Dick was right, but extracting his men from the situation was proving more complicated than expected. Bitter Creek was pinned down by fire from the locomotive, where the engineer and a passenger had barricaded themselves behind the boiler. Tulsa Jack was still inside the passenger car, and from the sounds coming out, he was enjoying himself far too much. Arkansas Tom was engaged in a running gun battle with the cowboys, his horse wheeling and spinning as he tried to get clear shots. A new sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive whistle of an approaching train from the north. Doolin's blood went cold. If that was a northbound freight, it might be carrying railroad guards or even federal marshals. "Mount up," he shouted. "We're leaving. Now." But Tulsa Jack either didn't hear him or didn't care. The big man emerged from the passenger car with blood on his clothes and a wild look in his eyes. In his hand was a scalp, long brown hair that had probably belonged to some unfortunate woman who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Jack, you crazy bastard!" Bitter Creek yelled, but there was admiration in his voice as well as revulsion. Arkansas Tom finally broke free from the cowboys, his horse lunging up the embankment toward where the others were gathering. But as he reached the top, one of the trail hands got lucky with a long shot. The bullet took Tom's horse in the chest, and the animal went down like a stone, pinning the young outlaw beneath its weight. "Tom!" Doolin called out, but even as he did, he could see it was hopeless. The horse was thrashing in its death agonies, and Tom's leg was clearly broken. Blood was spreading across his pants where a bone had probably punctured the skin. "Go!" Tom shouted back, his rifle still firing at the cowboys below. "Get out of here." It was the hardest decision Doolin had ever made, but he made it. "Ride," he commanded. The 4 remaining outlaws spurred their horses and galloped away from the massacre at Cimarron Station, leaving Arkansas Tom behind to face whatever came next. Behind them, the train burned and the screaming continued, mixing with the sound of approaching hoofbeats that probably belonged to a posse. They rode hard for 10 miles before stopping to rest their horses and divide the loot. Dynamite Dick's estimate proved accurate. Nearly $8,000 in gold and paper money, plus jewelry and watches taken from the passengers. "Not bad for an hour's work," Bitter Creek observed, counting his share. "Could have been better if you hadn't started the shooting," Doolin replied coldly. "That fireman had iron in his hand. What was I supposed to do? Let him plug me?" Tulsa Jack was cleaning his scalping knife on his pants leg, still wearing that wild look. "Should have stayed longer," he muttered. "Could have had some real fun with that preacher's wife." Doolin studied Jack's face and didn't like what he saw there. The man was losing whatever humanity he'd started with, becoming something more animal than human. It was a process Doolin had seen before, and it always ended the same way, with a bullet in the back or a rope around the neck. Dynamite Dick was already thinking ahead. "Where to next, Bill? We can't go back to Ingalls for a while, not after this." Doolin considered their options. The train robbery had been messier than he'd planned, bloodier than he'd wanted. Word would spread fast, and every lawman in the territory would be looking for them. They needed a place to lay low, somewhere they could plan their next move. "Creek Nation," he said finally. "I know a place near Tulsa town where we can hole up for a few weeks." They rode on through the gathering dusk, 4 men bound together by violence and the shared knowledge that they'd crossed a line that morning. Behind them, smoke still rose from the burning train, and somewhere in the distance they could hear the baying of tracking dogs. Arkansas Tom Jones would be caught, tried, and sentenced to prison. He'd escape eventually and kill again before meeting his own violent end. The others would continue their reign of terror across Oklahoma and Kansas, robbing banks and trains until the law finally caught up with them. But for now, they were free men riding through the Indian Territory night, their saddlebags heavy with stolen gold and their hands stained with innocent blood. They were Bill Doolin's wild bunch, killers, thieves, and the last of the great outlaw gangs that had terrorized the frontier for more than a generation. The age of the gunfighter was dying, but it wasn't dead yet. And as long as men like these rode the prairie trails, it would die hard and bloody, one train robbery at a time. Doolin pulled out his watch again and checked the time. 7:30. In a few hours, they'd be safely hidden in the Creek Nation, planning their next job and counting their money. In a few days, the newspapers would be full of stories about the Cimarron Station massacre, making them famous and feared throughout the territory. In a few years, most of them would be dead. But that was then, and this was now. And right now, Bill Doolin's wild bunch owned the night and everything that moved beneath the Oklahoma stars. The end. Don't miss a single action-packed wild western in the Rip Campbell adventures. Duckfoot Ranch, Pecan Creek War, Scatter Shot, $10 Mustang, Pistol Whipped, Red River Ferry, Last Drop. Cow Puncher, Bearcat Pass, Fast Shot, As Good as Gold, Ramble Range, Claim Jumper, Gunpowder Trouble, Bushwhack Range, Bear Wash War, Kicking Dust, Outlaw Range, Six Gun Preacher. Or grab one half of these in the box set on Amazon. Saddle up. Want all 30 Wild Western novels in one massive box set bundle? There are even more Wild Western adventures waiting on you at the pass. Head 'em off.